IVM.
Hey guys, IBM podcast is turning 7. Can you believe it? It's been a pretty awesome journey for us with these wonderful folks, and I can't wait to see what the next 7 years bring.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Sudisha, and today joining me is Aarushi Kataria. Both of us are working as junior scholars at the Takshashila Institution on a project titled 20 Million Jobs, through which we focus on policy solutions that might prove pivotal in creating 20 million jobs in our country. Hi, Aarushi.
Hi, Sudisha. Thank you so much for having.
Before we begin, I would like to state that the next batch of Takshishila's Graduate Certificate in Public Policy program starts on 7th May, and we are offering an early bird scholarship for which the deadline is 23rd March. So apply today. So, alright, lately the issue of unemployment has become a focal point in our country now that COVID-19 has exacerbated the problem of number of jobs reducing for the youth in India, which by the way has the largest young workforce in the world. And we are seeing that in the recent elections, the issue of unemployment has made to nearly all the manifestos of nearly all the parties. These concerns have been proven right by a joint study conducted by the Center for Economic Data and Analysis and the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, which stated that the number of unemployed youth in the age group of 15 to 30 years has declined by 30% in the last 5 years. So, Aarushi, let's talk about the findings in this recent report that shows the state of unemployment in India. What do you have to say about that?
So I think the first thing that we have to note is something that was really stark to me was manufacturing that accounts for nearly 17% of our economy. Yet, according to this report, this sector has employed just about 51 million people in 2016-17, and this has declined by 46% to around 27 million in 2020 to 2021. And this is important to understand because we've always looked at the manufacturing sector as a segment that will generate employment and economic growth. And this is corroborated by the fact that our own government came up with a policy of Make in India, which emphasizes the fact that manufacturing needs to be conducted in India. It came up with the fact that they aim to create 100 million jobs in manufacturing by 2022. Yet we're in 2022, the number of jobs in manufacturing seem to be declining. Another reason why manufacturing is an important source of employment is that when people move out of agriculture, they generally tend to be low skilled. And if we're hoping to create jobs and absorb the people coming out of agriculture, we need them to be in industries that are low skilled. And manufacturing tends to be that. So it's a worrying figure that over time, the number of jobs in manufacturing have been declining. But again, this is corroborated by the fact that the number of jobs in agriculture has been increasing. So another finding of the report, as you mentioned, is that the age brackets between, people less than 18 up to the age of 29 have seen declines in the last 5 years. And obviously, due to the pandemic, the biggest setback has been for those who are going to enter the labor market for the first time, or those who had just probably entered the labor market before the pandemic hit and, they were the worst of the lot. Now, the youth has always had high unemployment rates in India. This has been reported by multiple surveys that have been carried out. And over the years, there's been a decline in formal sector jobs. Approximately, to think of it, over 90% of jobs in India come from the informal sector. So when we're saying that the unemployment in the youth is rising, we're only talking about the 10% of the formal employment that we had to begin with. And even that has been declining over the last few years. Now, SIDA also notes that this decline in jobs for the youth or increase in unemployment of the youth is not something that is specific to the pandemic. This has been happening even before that. If you were to compare pre and post pandemic periods, the number of youth that were employed, in the last quarter of 2021 was 13% lower than the last quarter of 2019. And that is pre-pandemic. And even during this entire time, the labor force has declined by 9%. Now, this is very alarming because this tells us that the number of youth who we look at to be the largest number of people that would join a workforce in a year, about 18 million people turn 18 every single year in India. And we're saying that these people aren't joining the workforce. I think that's a very alarming figure that we're not having people join formal employment or even actively look for a job. Why is it that young people aren't looking for jobs? What do you think?
So there can be many reasons, and those numbers are definitely grim, to be just to put it simply. And I wanted to discuss this with you. What do you think are the? We know that COVID-19 has increased the problem of unemployment, and but we can't say that that is the only reason, right? This problem is very complex, and I wanted to know your opinion on what exactly are the reasons why jobs are on a decline even before the pandemic.
So I think, at least to begin with, what happened during the pandemic was a lot of the youth, like as I mentioned, a lot of the youth that is probably going to get employed was going into sectors that were the worst hit by the pandemic. Now, this would include hospitality, construction, manufacturing, and these industries saw a full closure during the pandemic. It wasn't like they were operating; they were completely shut down in the first year of the pandemic. And as they're reviving, one is hopeful that maybe they will absorb the people that they were supposed to. Another reason is that a lot of jobs in India require you to be skilled. For instance, the fastest growing sectors of the economy that generate the largest number of jobs are probably going to be those in the IT sector. They pay well, but they're also jobs that require you to be extremely educated and highly skilled. Yet, a large part of India that comes from rural India is not highly educated and they're low skilled. So what this does is it creates an imbalance between the supply and demand. Now, the demand is for high skilled workers that are highly educated, that carry relevant skills to the industry, whereas the supply is coming from low skilled workers that don't have relevant work experience, that don't have the educational qualifications that are required. And we also have to understand that India will always have an abundance of supply. We're a country that has a population of over 1.2 billion people. We will always have a workforce larger than we can absorb. And that is a grim reality that we're facing right now. And these numbers speak to that the supply is far greater than the demand. And within supply itself, there's so much heterogeneity that only if you are somebody who meets all check boxes that a company has, would you get hired. And I think that's where the problem is that in a perfectly competitive market, we'd expect supply and demand to equal. We'd expect there to be sort of homogeneity that the demand for workers is equal to the quality of the supply of the workers, but that's not happening. And I think that, according to me, is probably the biggest reason as to why jobs aren't being created, or if they are, as we know, they're being vacant. For instance, I think in 2018, it was found out that over 100,000 jobs in the government agencies were empty simply because people that had applied were not skilled enough. Or you find today people competing in thousands for a single post. So I think we have to understand that India will always have this mismatch of demand and supply until we have proper policies in place that could sort of help level this out.
Yeah, so on that note, let's talk about the issue of underemployment. So I've been reading anecdotes wherein I see that even well educated youth are standing in lines for hours just for menial jobs, right? So does that make this issue worse? Or do you think, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I would like you to expand on that.
So I think any form of unemployment, whether it's hidden unemployment, it's underemployment, is not good for the economy. And I think sometimes we tend to focus on just the youth when we're saying that, that there's a lot of unemployment in the youth and this is something we need to be worried about, which it is. But at the same time, we have to understand that there is so much disparity even within this group. So when we're saying that there is underemployment, that some factories are probably employing far many more people than they need to, and some people are just having a job and not really contributing productively. And that is obviously hampering our overall GDP, because if you're not productively contributing, you're not doing anything essentially. And I think that is a point of concern. And as we probably delve deeper into this and understand that some groups are going to be more affected by this than others, for instance, women are going to be more affected by this. You will have marginalized communities that would probably be more affected by policies like, situations like these. I think we need to understand that any form of unemployment in an economy is not good for it, whether it's someone in their youth, someone who's really old. I think unemployment is a very big problem. It has societal impacts. It leads to a lot of other problems that one wouldn't necessarily think begin with unemployment.
Yeah, agreed. And I really agree on the point wherein you said that women in marginalized communities have been pushed further into poverty and unemployment because obviously they have to face so much social stigma on a daily basis. And then they're going out, they're working, and now they can't do that anymore. And even if they do, they are being underemployed. So that's a big point of concern. Okay, so you said that any kind of unemployment is bad for the country. I agree with that. But is that a possibility that because the quality of jobs in India is really bad, people are trying to immigrate and they're trying to earn abroad and sending money back to India? So, would you like to comment on that?
I think that's like what you're referring to as brain drain, right? Like people tend to go abroad to maybe study and then they settle there and then they're getting a wage premium because of that. For instance, this happened starting with the early 90s. You had a huge boom wherein you had a lot of people moving to the US because you had a 3x wage premium if you were working there. Over the years, this wage premium has come down. For instance, in Bangalore, a company could hire somebody and pay somewhat the same salary. Obviously, a wage premium remains, but I do believe brain drain is a real phenomena. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's good for our economy? Is it bad? And then maybe I can add my viewpoint.
I don't think it's good for our economy at all. I don't agree with the fact that every other day we hear some Indian becoming the CEO of some company abroad. It seems like a waste of talent for our country, right? If they were here, then not only they would have been the head of a particular company, they would have ended up making a lot of jobs in the process. So I don't agree with that at all. I think that our countries should make, not exactly make provisions, but it should have the potential to make these people stay in the country, contribute to our country's economy, and not just go abroad. So we can't really blame them, right, for going abroad. I mean, they've worked so hard, they've studied so hard, so they're just looking for better opportunities.
I mean, just to sort of add to that before we take a break, but I mean, economically, like we just discussed that, like a large reason for the unemployment problem in India is the fact that there is a mismatch in demand and supply. And sure, we've discussed the fact that your supply needs to match the demand, but don't you think that, I mean, at least like theoretically, the fact that people are immigrating out of India is reducing the excess supply in our country, which might just make the problem, it might just solve the problem a little bit. Like if I were to be talking completely theoretically, it reduces the labor supply in the home economy. It's sort of reducing the competition for a single job. And you're probably going to be left behind with people who could take up the jobs that are left behind because now that you know that there is a significant mismatch that has been identified and people are able to sort of now get reskilled, upskill themselves, probably pick up a new skill as well because now they know that these are the skills that are getting employed somewhere else. That's a signal itself when people go abroad with certain skills. They're sending a signal back home as well. I think brain drain might just have unintended consequences that one hadn't thought of. And now, while I do also think that there is a flip side to this, that, it could lead to the problem of brain drain is like highly skilled professionals move out of a country and you're again going to be left with the problem that you have low skilled workers in the economy. It has also been noted that at times, this might just have the effect that the government starts investing a lot more in the domestic economy to sort of boost up educational prospects. It might make investment more favorable so as to get a lot more companies to invest and create more jobs. So I think one has to look for unintended consequences to most negative things, which might just end up being positive.
Yeah, I guess I agree with that. But then the question is, are we making the most out of this opportunity that people are moving abroad? And there is a gap, but what are we doing about that? So, on that note, let's take a break and we'll come back shortly.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. Our storytellers and storytellers Vineet meets legendary singer Usha Uthup and writer Shrishti Jha, who worked on the singer's authorized biography, The Queen of Indian Pop. What happens when a Mauryan spy meets the chief soldier of the Kadamba Nadu on a dark night? Kavita Jiva tells us on the Venvel Zenni Tamil podcast. On Audio Gyan, Kedar talks to Mohar Roy, co-founder of Co-Design, about building branding systems. On Press Decode, Sarah Bhakta and Prafulla touch upon the heartbreaking topic of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And on IVM Likes, Zalak asks Chalasmi and Antariksh about their thoughts on the movie Gangubai Kathiawadi. So, on a personal note, I wanted to let you all know that this week marks the 7th anniversary since I started IVM. I'm eternally grateful to the team we have here, especially Kavita Rajwade and Tejas Sringarpure, who have been here since the beginning. They've seen the struggles, our eventual acquisition by Pratilipi, and our continued struggles to make podcasting a large and thriving part of the media industry. We have the best hosts in the world, and I have to say that I'm so glad and so grateful that they have chosen to work with us. And finally, I'd like to say thank you to you, the millions of folks who have heard or watched our content. All I can say is, you ain't seen nothing yet. I hope you join us as we continue this journey. In the meanwhile, do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any platform you're listening to. You can also check us out on YouTube. To get a list of all of our channels, you can go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where you can go to all the channels. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week: SBI Life Insurance, Bank of Baroda, Max Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Okay, Aarushi, let's continue the discussion. So, I wanted to talk about the implications of unemployment among the youth of our country. What are some noticeable impacts that you have read about or you have seen? I, for one, have been consistently reading about rising mental health issues among the youth. The fact that recently National Crimes Record Bureau report shows that 67% of all Indians who died of suicide were young adults. So, and we also saw the riots in Bihar recently. Obviously, they've stemmed because there's a lack of jobs and the youth is frustrated that they're not able to earn money. So, do you want to comment on that?
I completely agree that unemployment is a huge malice for the economy, specifically because, like, I work with a mental health organization as well, and we've realized that the number of people in their early youth, that is, people aged from the age of 15 to 24, have been coming to us with so many problems. Given the fact that they were looking for something, they haven't been able to find that, and people in their early 20s have been coming to us with this being related to jobs. And the fact is that research and studies have found that if you're unemployed, you're going to have a higher tendency of probably having a mental health issue. You're more likely to have some form of depression. You might also have lifestyle diseases like heart attacks. And you just have a general, very, very somber outlook towards life. Don't, you stop seeing the hope in things, and you have this outlook that nothing can come out of this. And I think that's a very difficult outlook to get out of. So I think if someone's been unemployed for long enough, they might just stop considering themselves to be a part of the workforce for the rest of their lives. And I think that is going to be one productive worker that is lost to the economy. And at a point where we're trying to compete with global economies in terms of our productivity levels, our production levels, so to speak, I think every single worker is important, and it is in the hands of policymakers to ensure that we come up with policies that, one, provide support to people who aren't able to get employment given current circumstances and otherwise, or could also be personal circumstances of the person. Second is we need to invest in upskilling opportunities for these people, because it's a well documented fact that the education that is provided in government schools is not cutting it for a lot of the jobs. Even those that are low skilled probably require you to know how to operate a machine that you don't learn, because you're taught how to do math, but you're not probably taught how to do your taxes. You aren't taught a lot of what you need to do in the real world. So it's important that we come up with policies that allow for large scale upskilling of people. And I think we need to combat this at the root instead of thinking of, okay, we can do this after people are probably facing mental health issues. We need to combat it right in the beginning, that we try to nip the problem of unemployment so that mental health issues related to unemployment don't arise.
Yeah, and I think that the problem is even more complex than just unemployment and resulting mental health issues, because I think that when there's unemployment, people start lacking access to basic facilities, right? They are pushed to poverty. And in general, I think in society that leads to a rise in poorer neighborhoods, right? Where there's, increase in crime. For example, people are suffering from low self-esteem and they don't even have role models around them, right? I mean, even around them, people are trying to make ends meet. People are, I don't know, daily wage laborers, right? And that's not the kind of company you want if you want to, I don't know, go out and give an interview in a suit or whatever, right? That does not happen with them either. So what happens is that they end up becoming not only multidimensionally poor, but they are also suffering from mental health issues at the same time. So the problem is extremely complex. And let's say that something is being done about unemployment and these people do end up getting jobs. The fact that this kind of impact that they've had for years, it's really going to make their lives very difficult. And it's going to, even from people, like you said, you work with a mental health organization. I think people who are working there, for them also, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. And yeah, I guess you have something to say. Please continue.
Right. I think the point is, as you mentioned, like even when you're working with a mental health organization, something that we will soon probably start struggling with will be volume. As mental health has been made a part of the curriculum, the government has been trying to make mental health something that is not taboo anymore. And when we do that, it means that volumes are going to increase. People are going to be made more aware that what you're feeling is not something that you're feeling alone. It's a cause of concern and you should reach out for help. And our system is not equipped to handle that. That would be my first point. The second thing is, as you mentioned, poverty is going to be multidimensional. And I think something that we need to remember is that poverty is never absolute. Poverty is always a relative measure. You're poor in comparison to somebody else. And something that we tend to forget as people who come with some kind of privilege is that networks become very important when it comes to, finding employment in today's time where it's so hard to even get your foot into the door. And networking does that. When you have social capital and social networks, you're able to achieve a lot more than you would have been able to do otherwise. And because of the fact that the poor don't have access to these kind of networks, or they're not even taught about the very existence of these networks that acts as a barrier to their entry into the job market, is something that we need to be concerned about. And I think lastly, another problem that very few of us talk about is that unemployment in and of itself is generated for multiple reasons. It could be a shock to the economy that is created, a short term, you know, disequilibrium between the demand and supply. It could be the sudden closing of a sector which was employing a lot of people. But in India, this isn't the case. This has been something that has been going on for ages. India has been having jobless growth for a lot of time, where our GDP has been growing. There are sectors in the economy that have been growing at over 10% per annum, yet our jobs have not been growing at that rate. And that is something that we should be worried about, is the fact that we're growing as a country, yet we're not able to create these jobs. Which is to say that people from abroad, we have foreign direct investment into the country, which is at high levels right now. You have special economic zones that are created to generate large scale manufacturing units. And yet we haven't been able to achieve everything that was on paper. And I think that is something we need to be thinking about, that we've come up with these policies that are supposed to solve these problems over the last 20 years, that, we're supposed to create these 100 million jobs in the manufacturing sector, yet they've been declining. We were supposed to move people out of agriculture. For instance, the employment elasticity of agriculture is negative, which is to say, every time there is a growth in the agricultural sector, people move out of it. Yet, over the last few years, the number of people that are being employed by the agricultural sector has been growing, which is to say, there's a reverse migration happening. As a developing economy, we require urbanization. We don't require a movement back into the rural areas. And this was something that was highlighted even in the budget, with the government cutting down their expenditure on the Narega policy, which I think Anupam highlighted in another podcast, meant that the government was prioritizing the urban sectors, which is where employment is. But if people are moving back to the rural sectors, are our priorities really in the right place? I think that's something we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, and what you said brings me back to the point of women and marginalized communities, that the network thing that you mentioned, they already lack that. I mean, they just don't have any role models around them. I was reading an anecdote. Yeah, I was actually reading a news piece yesterday, wherein a woman in India who was working as a kindergarten teacher is now a daily wage laborer now because of COVID-19. And she just goes on to say that all my dreams are shattered now, which kind of broke my heart, because she's she's completely hopeless and helpless, right? She doesn't have any network. and she is going back to do something that she never wanted to do. She wanted to be a teacher, but now she's a laborer, right? So that's very grim. And that brings me to my last question, which is what can be done about these numbers? What should the government do? What should the people do? What can we do collectively as a society to make sure that more and more people get jobs and more and more people want to work, that they participate in labor force?
So I think the first thing would be like a sort of small plug for the 20 million jobs project is something we've been pitching, which is the career impact bonds, are basically a large obstacle to people getting the jobs that they want is they don't have the requisite skills. And the barrier to getting this requisite skill is that it requires investment in time and money. Yet the opportunity cost of this time that they would invest and the money is very high. And that stops them from upskilling themselves and then sort of relegates them to low paying jobs, probably that they aren't being very productive about. And that is a problem. So I think the worst thing would be to sort of come up with the framework and a policy in the economy that would allow people to upskill, that would take away the burden, at least momentarily, while they were upskilling themselves from them to have to pay for it, so that people have an incentive to get upskilled and ensure that they're keeping up with the time. Because we're living in an economy that, if we were to believe, works on the forces of demand and supply, we need to ensure that if the demand is for something, the supply meets it. And if right now, even though our general supply is very large, the actual supply that could satisfy the jobs that we have right now is very low. So I think while we look at it and we generally say we have an excess supply situation of labor, maybe we do have an excess demand of high skilled labor and we need to meet that. And for that, the supply for high skilled labor needs to rise. So that would be my first suggestion, would be to come up with policies that allow people to upskill and get better paying jobs, that have job security, that provide some sort of social security to them as well, that allow them to have intergenerational mobility, that don't relegate someone to a job that does not even satisfy basic subsistence needs to begin with. And I think the second policy would be that create jobs in sectors that can absorb people. This includes construction, this includes manufacturing. These, for instance, if you take China's economy, has a very large labor intensive manufacturing sector. They're able to employ a lot of people through that sector. India, on the other hand, does not have a labor intensive manufacturing sector, which is something we could probably change to begin with. That while we're still a developing economy and we have a very, very large labor force that we need to absorb, and we need to get our GDP up. For instance, our estimates for the 20 million jobs project say that we need GDP growth of at least 10% to be able to create the jobs we need, along with the unemployment elasticity of 0.4, which means that we need to increase our production. And if a way of doing that is to employ larger amount of labor without letting diminishing marginal returns set in, that should be done. We should be facilitating the creation of these industries. And I think something you're very passionate about has been doing away with, archaic labor reform laws, because they've been preventing companies from probably hiring more people, allowing economies of scale to set in. So I think I'd let you elaborate on that, but I do believe we need to do away with some of the labor laws that we have. We need to do away with laws that prevent a firm to be properly productive as much as it could be. I think those would be like top three suggestions that I have right now.
Yeah, that's true. And on labor law reforms, I think we also need to demand laws that make professional life more easier for employees, right? Not just from the firm side. I think considering that the rights of people to not just work for money, but have a respectable life working, I think that might help them participate in the labor force more. I think you mentioned what we can do as a country, but I think from a firm point of view or from the society's point of view, I've seen in the last 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic set in that many people want to work closer to their families. Many people want to shift to tier two cities. Women want to continue working from home because, they have families, they have some things to do at home, but they also want to continue working for the office as well. So, setting policies within the organization wherein you offer a hybrid environment. I recently saw that Twitter just sent an email to all the employees that you're free to choose where you want to work from. You can come to office if you want. You can work from home if you want. You can sometimes come to office, sometimes you can work from home, whatever you choose. So that those kind of flexible policies, I think, be beneficial. They will be useful when it comes to ensure participation of people in the labor force. Okay, so on that note, I think we can end this discussion. Thank you, Aarushi, for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Tugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Eventually, you'll see the end of your childhood,
Get accustomed to womanhood.
enjoy the experience of sisterhood,
Might get to wifehood
or not, choose motherhood,
or not. You'll learn to define your personhood.
earn a livelihood,
Change the neighborhood.
and get rid of the falsehood that life post-academia is easy.
So join me, Natasha,
And me, Ayushi,
on a journey from station starting point
to station, what now?
next station, Pudin station, and hopefully Agla station, adulthood.
Fresh episodes out every Thursday.